Hello, my name is Matthew Good. I'm 28 years old, just an ordinary guy who spends his days buried in a car garage on the outskirts of town. My job isn't glamorous, grease, wrenches, and broken cars in need of fixing. But I love it, honestly. When a worn-out engine finally purrs smoothly, it feels like I've won a battle. I'm not the dreamy type or one for long-winded stories, but if you ask about my life, I'll tell it straight. It hasn't been easy, and my family is the biggest reason why. I grew up in a home where love was a luxury. My parents, Richard Good and Linda Good, were the kind of people who lived for themselves. They loved parties, spontaneous trips, and flashy things I could never wrap my head around. But taking care of their kids, that wasn't their thing. From a young age, my sister Clare and I were left to fend for ourselves. Not the kind of abandonment where you're thrown out on the street, but the kind where you're left alone in your own house, figuring out how to deal with an empty stomach, homework, or sick days with no one to care. I remember when I was 10, I had to bike to the pharmacy to buy medicine for Claire when she had a high fever, while our parents were off at some party. They weren't nurturing or supportive, but the strange thing is, they always demanded we be grateful. "You should be thankful I'm raising you," my father would yell, as if giving us a roof over our heads was some grand favor. Claire, my little sister, is 4 years younger than me. At 24, she's a gentle, empathetic girl with a heart bigger than anyone I've ever known. Claire works as a trainee nurse at the local hospital, and I can see she was born for it. She has this uncanny intuition, like she can sense someone's pain before they even speak. Once I saw her sitting by an elderly patient's bedside, holding the old woman's hand, listening to her repetitive stories with a patient smile. I'm proud of her, but sometimes I worry that her sensitivity makes her vulnerable. In a family like ours, kindness can sometimes feel like a burden. I'm different. I'm not as sensitive as Claire. I'm disciplined, logical, and practical. Life forged me that way. When you grow up in a house where no one cares, you learn to stand on your own. I'm good with my hands, whether it's fixing cars or tackling everyday problems. At 15, I was already earning money mowing lawns for neighbors, using it to buy food for both Claire and me. I don't hold a grudge, not anymore. Those years taught me that if you want to survive, you rely on yourself. But we weren't always alone. There's a part of our past I only know through stories. My grandparents, Henry and Margaret, were once respected by the entire town. They were successful entrepreneurs owning a few building supply stores. Not filthy rich, but enough to make the good name a symbol of kindness and generosity. People here still talk about them. How Henry once paid for a poor family's roof repair, or how Margaret organized free meals for kids at Christmas. Sadly, they passed away when I was too young, around 6. I don't remember much, just vague images. My grandmother's warm smile, my grandfather's big hand patting my shoulder. But I know they were good people, which makes me wonder, how did my parents turn out so different? If my grandparents were light, my parents were darkness. They were greedy, quick to blame, and always saw Claire and me as burdens. I once heard my mother mutter that having us was her biggest mistake. My father was worse. He could berate me for hours over a broken glass, but never once asked what I learned at school or if I needed help. They didn't just neglect us. They made us feel like our very existence was an inconvenience. I've tried to find reasons, to understand why they were like that. Were they unloved as kids? Did life's struggles turn them this way? I don't know. But I learned one thing: you can't change others, only how you deal with them. Still, Claire and I survived. Not only survived, but tried to become better versions of ourselves. I work hard at the garage, learning to fix every kind of car, from beat-up old pickups to sleek new sedans. I like the sense of control, the feeling that I can fix something in a chaotic world. Claire pours her compassion into every shift, caring for patients with a dedication I know she honed during our lonely days. We're two different pieces, but we fit together perfectly. I protect Claire, and she reminds me to take care of myself, that life isn't just wrenches and engines. Our small town still holds stories about my grandparents, but for Claire and me, they're just distant tales. We don't have clear memories of them, only that they were wealthy, loved, and left a legacy our parents never wanted to talk about. Once a neighbor mentioned that my grandparents had talked about leaving something for Claire and me, but my parents always brushed it off when I asked. "Don't dream up nonsense," my mother once said, her voice icy. I didn't dwell on it. I'm used to expecting nothing from them. But life goes on. Claire and I, though seen as burdens by our parents, keep moving forward. I don't know if it's fate or just sheer stubbornness, but we've learned to live without relying on them. I'm proud of that, though sometimes deep down I wish for a real family, the kind you see HD where people love and protect each other. But that's not my story. My story starts here in a small town with a mechanic brother, a compassionate nurse sister, and a family that was never truly a family. Then one day, everything seemed to change. It was a Friday afternoon when I got the news that I'd been promoted to garage manager. Not a huge leap, but for me it was a milestone. I'd worked my tail off, going from a kid wiping down cars to leading an entire team of mechanics. It felt like proof that I didn't need anyone to succeed. I immediately called Claire to share the good news. And as I expected, my little sister had her own reason to celebrate. After months as a trainee nurse, she'd just been hired as a full-fledged nurse at the hospital. Her voice over the phone was radiant, like the whole world was smiling at her. We made plans to meet for dinner at our usual small diner, raising a glass to each other's victories, just the two of us as always. But that evening, as I was driving back to my rented apartment near the garage, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother, asking me to stop by because they had something to discuss. So I changed course, driving about 30 minutes to my parents' house. When I pushed open the door, I saw my parents sitting in the living room. The sight was so surreal, I almost didn't believe my eyes. Richard Good and Linda Good, who were rarely in the same room together in this house, were sitting there on the old couch wearing smiles I couldn't remember seeing since forever. "Matthew, you're here," my mother said, her voice unnaturally sweet. My father, usually gruff, nodded at me like I was a respected colleague, not the son he typically yelled at. I stood frozen, still gripping the doorknob, feeling like I'd walked into the wrong movie. "Sit down, dear," my mother said, gesturing to the chair across from them. "We have something to talk about." I sat slowly, my mind swirling with questions. Moments later, the front door opened again and Claire walked in. Clearly, she'd been summoned too. When our eyes met, the surprise in her gaze mirrored my own. Then my father spoke, his voice low and deliberate, like he was reading a rehearsed speech. "We heard you got promoted, Matthew. And Claire, you're now a full-time nurse. We're very proud." "Proud?" The word sounded wrong coming from him, like a misaligned bolt in an engine. I wanted to snap back to ask when they started caring about our successes, but I held my tongue, waiting to see where this was going. "We should do something to celebrate," my mother chimed in, her eyes glinting oddly. "We were thinking, why don't we go camping together? A family trip to Alaska, just the four of us. A chance to get closer." Alaska? Family bonding? It felt like someone had punched me in the chest. Claire, sitting beside me, grabbed my hand under the table, and I knew she was as shocked as I was. But in her eyes, I saw a flicker of hope, the kind I'd long since abandoned. Claire, with her big heart, still wanted to believe our parents could change. "Alaska?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where's this coming from?" My father gave a forced smile. "Oh, we just thought you kids are grown, successful. It's time we did something together, like a real family." His words sounded nice, but something felt off. I couldn't pinpoint it, but unease crept into my gut, like hearing an odd noise from an engine without knowing the cause. Claire, ever the optimist, gave a small smile. "That sounds nice, Mom, Dad. I think it'd be fun." Her voice trembled like she was trying to convince herself. I looked at her, wanting to warn her not to get her hopes up, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. If Claire wanted to believe in this chance, I wouldn't ruin it. Sure, I said, shrugging. Alaska. Why not? And then, as if to shock me further, my father added, we'll cover all the costs. Consider it a gift for your successes. I was floored. My parents, paying for something? These were the people who grumbled when I asked for money for textbooks in 8th grade, who said having Claire and me was their biggest mistake. Claire turned to me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Really, Mom, Dad? She asked, her voice quivering with joy. You guys are making me so excited. I looked at Claire, seeing her eyes light up with a hope I'd buried long ago. She wanted to believe our parents could change, that this was a chance to be a real family. But deep inside, unease stirred like the screech of tires on a slick road. Why now? Why Alaska? And why were they suddenly so generous? I wanted to say something, to tell Claire not to hope too much, but seeing her smile, I couldn't. All right, I said, shrugging, keeping my tone neutral. If you guys are set on it, we'll go along. We started planning. Claire and I arranged for 5 days off that weekend, no easy feat with our busy new roles. But Claire was so excited I couldn't say no. She texted and called me all week, talking about the trip like it was a dream come true. And me, despite my doubts, wanted to make her happy. 2 weeks later, we were in Alaska. The long flight, snow-covered roads, and biting cold made it feel like stepping into another world. We stopped at a small lodge, a cozy place with wooden walls and a crackling fireplace. It was our base before starting the camping trip, where we'd prep our gear and rest for a day. I had to admit the scenery was breathtaking. Snow-capped mountains, sprawling pine forests, and a sky so blue it didn't seem real. But even that beauty couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me. That evening we had what I can only call a rarely cozy dinner. My parents acted like actual parents. They asked about my job, Claire's work, even cracked jokes. Claire was glowing like she'd waited her whole life for this moment. I wanted to join in, to believe this was a new beginning, but something was off. I noticed my mother packing haphazardly, tossing random items into her backpack like she didn't care about the trip. My father kept glancing at his watch like he was waiting for something. When I asked about the itinerary, where we were going, how long we'd stay, they both dodged. Oh, just relax, Matthew, my mother said, waving a hand. We've got it all sorted. Then I overheard them whispering when they thought Claire and I were asleep. I was in our room, the door slightly ajar, and fragments of their conversation drifted in. Just stick to the plan. No need to worry, they won't know. I couldn't catch everything, but each word felt like a needle in my chest. Claire, asleep in the next bed, heard nothing. I didn't want to worry her, so I kept quiet. But as I closed my eyes, trying to push away the unease, I couldn't stop thinking, what's going on? And what are we really walking into? The next morning, we left the lodge to start the camping trip. The Alaskan air was frigid, my breath turning to white vapor. We stopped at a ranger station before heading into the deep wilderness. The ranger, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, looked at us sternly. He pointed to a map on the table, his voice low but firm. This area is no joke. Grizzly bears, wolves, harsh weather. Anything can kill you if you're not careful. I recommend sticking to this safe route, he said, tracing a red line on the map. It's near populated campsites with easy access to rescue if needed. I nodded, finding his advice sensible. But my father, with a forced smile, shook his head. No, we want something more special. He pointed to a winding path leading deep into the wilderness. The views are spectacular, less traveled. That's the real experience. My mother nodded in agreement, her voice syrupy. Exactly. We want the real thing, don't we, kids? A chill ran down my spine. That route looked anything but safe, remote, isolated with no sign of human presence. I glanced at Claire, hoping she sensed something off too. Her eyes flickered with doubt, but my mother quickly grabbed her hand, smiling brightly. Claire, you'll love it. The scenery's like a painting, I promise. Claire smiled back, though it looked strained. She glanced at me as if seeking my opinion, but before I could speak, my father cut in. "Come on, Matthew, don't complicate things, just follow us." His tone carried a sharp edge, hinting at something sinister. I swallowed hard, the unease now a heavy weight in my chest. But Claire had nodded, and I didn't want to let her down. We left the ranger station and began our trek into the forest. The deeper we went, the wilder it became. Thick pine canopies blocked the sunlight, and the air was so cold it stung. My parents led the way, moving briskly, but I noticed their backpacks were oddly light, like they weren't planning to stay long. I wanted to ask, but every time I opened my mouth, my mother would pivot to talk about the beautiful scenery or family experience, shutting me down. By the end of the day, we set up camp in an area so remote I wasn't sure I could find our way back. All around us was forest, the wind whistling through the trees, and somewhere in the distance the eerie calls of wild animals. I tried to stay calm, helping Claire set up the tent, but my mind was restless. Night fell, and the cold was bone deep. We sat around a small fire eating canned food my mother had prepared. My parents chatted cheerfully, but I couldn't miss the glances they exchanged, quick, secretive looks like they were hiding something. When Claire crawled into our tent to sleep, I stayed by the fire, pretending to check our gear. Then I heard it, whispers from my parents' tent. "Just tomorrow morning. No one will know." I strained to hear more, but the forest wind drowned out most of it. My heart tightened. I wanted to storm their tent and demand answers, but I had no proof, just a gut feeling. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my past was making me see things that weren't there. But as I slipped into our tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that Claire and I were being led into a trap. At dawn, a howling wind tore through the darkness, jolting me awake. I bolted upright, unzipping the tent door. In that moment, my blood ran cold. My parents' tent was empty. The flap swayed in the wind, the inside a mess, their belongings nearly all gone, as if they'd fled in a hurry. I shouted their names, my voice hoarse in the desolate air. But only the wind answered. Claire woke up, rubbing her eyes, her voice trembling. "What's wrong, Matt?" We searched the area, but there was no sign of our parents. Their backpacks were gone, their gear scattered like they'd left in a rush. Then Claire found a small note tucked under a rock. She handed it to me, her hands shaking. I read it, and each word stabbed into my heart. "We wish you could see a grizzly or wolf up close before it tears you apart." I froze, as if the world had collapsed. Claire looked at me, her eyes wide, tears streaming down. They abandoned us, didn't they?" Her voice broke. I didn't answer right away, too stunned. But as I looked into Claire's panicked eyes, the horrific truth hit me. Our parents didn't just abandon us. They wanted nature to kill us. They'd planned it all, from the sweet invitation to the lavish trip to this isolated path. It was all a trap. I grabbed Claire's hand, trying to keep my voice steady despite my pounding heart. "We'll be okay, Claire. I promise. We'll survive." But as I looked out at the dark forest surrounding us, with the howling wind and shadowy shapes of wild animals, I knew the real fight was just beginning. Claire trembled with fear, but I saw a spark of resilience flare in her eyes. She wasn't weak, despite her tender heart. "They want us dead, Matthew," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I won't let them win." I squeezed her hand tightly and nodded. "We won't let them win." There was no time for grief or resentment. The sun was rising, but Alaska's cold seeped into our bones. I checked our tent and saw that our parents had taken most of the supplies, water, food, even the map. They left us with a few crackers, 2 small water bottles, and a pocket knife. That was all we had to face the wilderness. But I was no stranger to being abandoned. Claire and I had learned to fend for ourselves since childhood. This was just another challenge, bigger and more dangerous, but I was determined not to let it break us. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. As a kid, I'd read survival books from the library to pass the time during nights when our parents didn't come home. I remembered the basics. Find water, stay warm, avoid predators. My work at the garage helped too. I knew how to stay calm under pressure, how to fix things from scraps. The discipline I'd forged through years of neglect was now our only weapon. "Claire," I said firmly, "we need to find our way back. Follow me." Claire nodded. She didn't say much, but I saw her scanning our surroundings, her eyes sharp like a hunter's. Claire had an intuition I lacked, the ability to notice subtle things like how she sensed what patients needed before they spoke. "Matt, I think I hear water flowing," she said, pointing east. "If we find water, we won't go thirsty." I nodded, impressed by her composure. We packed what little we had, slung our backpacks on, and began our journey. The Alaskan forest was a deadly maze. Dense trees blocked the sunlight, making it hard to navigate. The ground was wet and slippery, each step a challenge. We followed the sound of water Claire had heard, but with every passing hour, the cold grew harsher. The temperature dropped fast, our breath turning to white mist. I wrapped my jacket tightly around Claire, though I was shivering too. "Keep going," I said, as much to encourage her as to remind myself. By noon, a sound stopped my heart, a low, rumbling growl nearby. Claire gripped my hand, her face pale. "Bear," she whispered. I pulled her behind a large boulder, my heart pounding. I recalled what I'd read. Grizzly bears rarely attack unless threatened. But if they're hungry or feel their territory is invaded, it's a different story. I signaled Claire to stay quiet, then slowly peeked over the rock. About 100 meters away, a massive grizzly was sniffing the air, its head swaying as if searching. I clutched the pocket knife, knowing it was useless against such a beast. Claire, with her sharp instincts, whispered, "It hasn't seen us. Let's circle around." We moved slowly, almost crawling, avoiding twigs that could snap. Every small sound, a rustling leaf, a rolling pebble, made me want to scream from tension. After what felt like an eternity, we slipped out of the bear's range. Claire exhaled, but I could tell she was still listening, her ears tuned to the forest's every sound. "Something's moving to the west," she said softly. "We should go the other way." I trusted Claire, not just because she was my sister, but because her instincts were never wrong. The first night was a true test. The temperature plunged below freezing, so cold I felt my fingers might snap off. We built a fire to keep warm and ward off animals. Claire and I huddled in the tent, sharing a thin blanket. She shivered but managed to smile. "Matt, I've cared for patients in freezing ER rooms. This isn't worse." I laughed, though my heart was heavy. "My brave nurse," I said, pulling her closer for warmth. By the second day, we ran out of water. My mouth was parched, my mind foggy. Claire found a small stream, but the water was so cold it felt like swallowing needles. We filtered it through a piece of my shirt, hoping it was clean enough. The bigger problem was we were lost. No map, no compass, just the faint sun to guide us. I tried to recall how to navigate using tree shadows, but hunger and exhaustion blurred everything. Then disaster struck. While climbing a slippery, rocky slope, I lost my balance and fell. My knee slammed into a rock, blood seeping through my torn pants. The pain was excruciating, but I gritted my teeth and tried to stand. Claire, with her nurse's instincts, knelt beside me. "Don't move, Matt," she said, her voice eerily calm. She tore a strip from her shirt, tied it tightly around my wound to stop the bleeding, and checked for signs of a fracture. "Just a shallow cut," she said, but I saw worry in her eyes. "Thanks," I whispered, touched by her composure. We didn't say it, but we both knew. If one of us went down, the other wouldn't make it. We needed each other more than ever. Claire took the lead, her keen eyes spotting subtle signs, a broken twig, a disturbed stone, as if the forest spoke to her. "I think someone's been through here," she said, pointing to a faint trail. I saw nothing but dirt and leaves, but I trusted her. We followed the path, each step a battle against cold, hunger, and fear. On the third day, when I thought we couldn't hold on, Claire stopped. "Matt, listen," she whispered, tilting her ear forward. I strained and heard it, human voices, faint but real. We pushed toward the sound, and finally, through the trees, I saw the glow of a campsite. Relief flooded me, but I knew the journey wasn't over. We'd survived the forest, but our parents, the ones who wanted us dead, were still out there somewhere. As we stumbled into the campsite, I felt the eyes of the 4 people sitting around the fire on us. A family, parents, an older teenage son, and a younger daughter. They stared at us, 2 ragged figures, faces smeared with dirt, clothes soaked from forest dew. The mother, a woman about my age with neatly tied hair, jumped up immediately. "My God, what happened to you?" she exclaimed, her voice full of concern. Her husband, a burly man with a kind gaze and a thick beard, stood up too. Come here," he called. Claire trembled beside me, but she managed a weak smile. I supported her, feeling my own body teetering on the edge of exhaustion. "We got lost," I said, my voice hoarse. I didn't want to tell the truth, that our parents had deliberately abandoned us to die, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want Claire to relive that horrific moment by speaking it aloud. The mother introduced herself as Susan. She quickly wrapped a warm blanket around Claire and handed me another. "Sit down, both of you. It's freezing." She ushered us toward the fire, where the smell of grilled meat and potatoes made my stomach growl. The son brought us 2 cups of warm water, and the little daughter scurried to fetch bread from their tent. "Are you okay?" she asked, her big eyes filled with worry. Claire smiled at her, though I knew she was holding back tears. "Thank you," Claire said, her voice gentle, like how she spoke to her patients. Susan and her husband Tom prepared a hot meal, bean soup and grilled meat, and sat with us, not prying, just quietly tending to us. I looked at them. This family of 4, and a sharp pain stabbed my heart. They loved each other, laughed, shared every piece of bread. It was something Claire and I had never had. "Your family is so happy," Claire said softly, her voice sincere. Susan smiled, placing a hand on Claire's shoulder. "Thank you. We're not perfect, but we try." I looked at Claire and saw her eyes glistening. I knew what she was thinking, that we'd once dreamed of a family like this, but our parents had crushed that dream. After the meal, our strength slowly returned. Tom showed us the shortest route back to the lodge, a few miles away. "Follow this stream, then turn left when you see a big arrow-shaped rock. You'll find a trail leading to the lodge," he said, sketching a rough map on paper. Susan packed us some food and water, and their little daughter slipped a small embroidered handkerchief with a flower design into Claire's hand. "To keep you warm," she said, making Claire laugh for the first time in 3 days. As we left the campsite, Claire gripped my hand, her voice low. "Matt, I don't want to go to the police right away." I looked at her, surprised. Claire was usually the one who wanted to do things by the book, but this time her eyes were steely. "If we go to the police, they'll deny it. They'll say it was a misunderstanding, an accident. We need a trap." I stopped, staring into my sister's determined eyes. Claire was no longer the naive girl dreaming of a happy family. She'd seen the truth and she wanted justice. "You're right," I said, my mind racing. "We need to know why they did this, and we need proof." I thought of the cruel note, but I knew it wasn't enough to convict them. Our parents were cunning. They'd find a way to cover their tracks. "We'll make them think we're dead," I said, the idea taking shape. "If they believe we were eaten by bears, they'll reveal their real motives." We headed to the ranger station. The ranger on duty, a woman named Rachel with sharp eyes, listened to our story. I told her everything, from the sudden invitation, the remote trail, to the horrifying note. Claire added details, her voice calm but laced with pain. Rachel didn't interrupt, just took careful notes. When we finished, she looked at us, her eyes a mix of anger and sympathy. "I've seen a lot of strange things out here, but this..." She shook her head. "What do you want me to do?" "We want you to help us set a trap," I said firmly. "Tell our parents we were killed by bears. Say you found tracks, torn clothes, anything to make them believe we're dead. And record their reaction." Claire nodded, adding, "We need to know what they do next." Why they wanted us dead. Rachel frowned but then nodded. All right, I have a small recorder and a hidden camera. I'll go to the lodge, talk to your parents. If they slip up, we'll have evidence. She looked at us sternly. But you two need to stay safe. Stay here, don't let them see you're alive. Relief washed over me like a weight lifting from my chest. But a new fear crept in. Fear that this plan might fail, or worse, that we'd uncover a truth more horrific than we'd imagined. Claire squeezed my hand, as if sensing my thoughts. We can do this, she said, her voice resolute. I looked at my sister, seeing a strength I hadn't fully recognized before. We weren't just survivors of the wilderness. We were two people determined to reclaim justice. As Rachel prepared to leave with her recorder and camera, I gripped Claire's hand, unable to sit still and wait. We want to go with you, I said firmly. Rachel raised an eyebrow, her gaze probing. Are you sure? If your parents see you're alive, this plan falls apart. Claire tightened her grip on my hand, adding, We'll stay hidden. We need to see their reaction with our own eyes. We deserve to know the truth. Rachel studied us, then nodded slowly. All right, but you follow my lead and stay absolutely quiet. I nodded in agreement. We climbed into Rachel's Jeep, hiding under a thin blanket in the back seat to avoid detection. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the rage burning in my chest. Our parents had wanted us dead, and now I wanted to look them in the eyes when they thought their plan had succeeded. Claire sat beside me, her breathing shallow but quick, her hand trembling but her eyes cold. We didn't speak, just shared a look, the look of survivors ready to confront those who betrayed us. As the Jeep rolled toward the lodge, Alaska's icy air seemed to seep into every breath. My heart burned with fury, but I knew I had to stay calm. Our parents were there, thinking the wilderness had swallowed us whole. And now, we were going to make them show their true colors. Rachel drove slowly, her eyes fixed on the snow-covered road. Claire and I huddled under the blanket in the back seat, barely daring to breathe. Each turn of the wheels seemed to stretch time, making my heart pound harder. I imagined our parents' faces when they heard we were dead. Would they fake grief? Or would their true selves slip out? Claire gripped my hand tightly, as if passing me her courage. It'll be okay, Matt, she whispered, her voice soft but resolute. I nodded, though my mind was a mess. We'd survived the forest, but now facing the truth about our parents felt like walking into another storm. The Jeep stopped a short distance from the lodge, and Rachel directed us to hide behind a thick cluster of bushes near the parking lot. From there, we could see the lodge's main entrance without being spotted. Rachel checked the hidden recorder in her jacket, then gave us a final look. Stay put, she said sternly. Don't do anything until I signal. I nodded, feeling like a soldier gearing up for battle. Claire squeezed my hand harder, her eyes gleaming with determination. Rachel walked into the lodge, her stride calm but commanding. Through the window, I saw our parents at the front desk, their luggage piled up as if they were in a hurry to leave. My mother wore an expensive fur coat, chatting with a staff member, while my father stood beside her, checking his phone impatiently. They looked relaxed, like they'd just returned from a normal vacation, not from abandoning their children to die in the wilderness. Rage surged inside me, but I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay silent. Rachel approached them, her voice carrying through the slightly open window. Mr. and Mrs. Good, she called, her tone low but sharp. My parents turned, momentarily startled. I'm Rachel, a ranger in this area. I have news about your children, Matthew and Clare. My mother placed a hand on her chest as if preparing to perform a grieving act. Oh, what happened? She asked, her voice trembling with fake emotion. My father frowned but said nothing, his eyes cold and calculating. Rachel sighed, her voice heavy. I'm sorry to inform you, but we found evidence of a grizzly bear attack at your campsite. Torn clothes, blood. We believe Matthew and Clare didn't make it. I heard Clare catch her breath beside me, her fingers digging into my shoulder. I peered through the bushes, waiting for our parents' reaction. But there were no tears, No cries of anguish. My mother covered her mouth, but I caught the faintest smirk like she was hiding joy. My father nodded slowly, his eyes glinting oddly. That's terrible, he said, his voice devoid of grief. We told them to be careful, but they were too stubborn. Blood rushed to my head. Stubborn? They'd left us to die with a note wishing we'd be torn apart by wild animals, and now they dared to blame us? Rachel tilted her head, her voice sharpening. That's odd. We found a note at the campsite, handwritten. It said you wished your children would see a grizzly or wolf up close before it tears them apart. Care to explain? She pulled the note from her pocket, holding it up in front of them. My mother's face paled, but she quickly regained her composure. Oh, that was just a warning to scare them into being careful. I told them to come back with us, but they wouldn't listen. We didn't mean anything by it, just trying to teach them a lesson. My father nodded, his voice smooth. Exactly. Matthew and Claire are grown, independent. We didn't abandon them, we just let them have their wilderness experience. We didn't expect it to end this badly. Their lies were so polished I almost believed them, if I hadn't lived through the nightmare myself. But Rachel wasn't fooled. She shook her head, her voice icy. Independent? You left them in a dangerous forest with no supplies, no map. And this note doesn't sound like a warning. It sounds like a curse. She paused, staring them down. If you have anything to say, say it now before I involve the police for a full investigation. My father scoffed, but I saw sweat beading on his forehead. You're misunderstanding. I told you our kids didn't listen. They're stubborn, wanted to stay and experience the wild. But if you want to keep things simple, we can make a deal. I don't want to dig into my kids' deaths. After all, they're already gone, eaten by bears. His voice dropped, and he glanced around to ensure no one was listening. $3.5 million. A good deal for you. I want you to finalize their death records quickly, and we're done here. We don't want to make trouble for the Rangers. My mother nodded, her eyes gleaming with greed. We just want peace, no fuss. Claire trembled beside me, not from fear, but from rage. I held her hand tightly, stopping her from rushing out. Rachel, still calm, nodded as if considering their offer. But I knew she was stalling. Before leaving the ranger station, she discreetly contacted the Alaska State Troopers, and now I heard the faint sound of engines approaching, the unmistakable roar of police vehicles. Rachel kept them talking, her voice growing sharper. So you wanted them dead? For money? Or something else? My father gave a dry laugh, his tone now openly cruel. They were a burden, and they never listened to us. They brought this on themselves. So if you agree to handle this quietly, I'll give you the $3.5 million as promised. Just as he finished, the lodge door swung open. 3 police officers strode in, their uniforms crisp, hands resting on their holsters. Mr. and Mrs. Good, one called out. We need to verify information regarding the disappearance of Matthew and Clare Good. My parents, still believing we were dead, responded confidently. Oh, we've already spoken to the ranger here. A tragic accident. They began weaving a story, adding details about how we got lost, didn't listen, and were eaten by bears. Rachel raised a hand, cutting them off. I think you should hear this first. She pressed a button on her recorder, and my father's voice filled the room, clear and cold, talking about the bribe and their plot to kill us. My parents' faces went ashen, their eyes wide with horror. You recorded us? You tricked us, my mother stammered, her voice breaking. That was Rachel's cue. Claire and I stepped out from the bushes and pushed open the lodge door. Our parents turned, and when they saw us, alive, standing there with eyes full of fury, they froze. My mother staggered back, nearly collapsing, while my father stood rooted, his mouth agape in disbelief. No, it's impossible, he muttered. Claire stepped forward, her voice trembling but razor sharp. You thought we'd die in the forest, but we're here and you've lost. I said nothing. just stared at them, feeling like the world had slowed to a crawl. The lead officer stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Richard Good and Linda Good, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As he recited their Miranda rights, the other two officers handcuffed our parents right in front of us. My mother burst into tears, but not out of remorse. They were the tears of someone caught red-handed. My father just hung his head, his eyes empty. As they were led to the police car, Claire gripped my hand, tears streaming down her face. But this time, they were tears of release. We had survived, not just the wilderness, but the cruelest betrayal of all. 2 months passed like a prolonged nightmare, but they also gave Claire and me time to regain our composure. We returned to our small town, where people looked at us with a mix of pity and curiosity. The news spread quickly. The Good kids, abandoned by their parents in Alaska to die, became the talk of my garage, Clare's hospital, and local coffee shops. I avoided the press, dodging calls from reporters eager to exploit our broken family story. But Claire, with her sensitive heart, sometimes sat alone crying, clutching childhood memories now tainted by the horrific truth. I remember those first nights back, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why our parents did it. They weren't poor or coerced, they were simply greedy, selfish, and now I knew they wanted us dead to claim something. Perhaps the inheritance from our grandparents that I only vaguely knew about. Claire was different. She tried to find reasons to forgive, but every time she recalled that vicious note, she shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, Matt. They don't deserve it." We met with a lawyer, prepared our statements, and each retelling felt like peeling off my own skin. But we had to do it. Justice doesn't come on its own. The trial took place in a small courthouse in a nearby city on a chilly autumn morning. I wore my only suit, Claire a simple black dress, and we walked into the courtroom with heavy hearts. The room was more crowded than I expected. Reporters, neighbors, even a few old high school friends. Our parents sat in the defendant's seats, dressed in prison uniforms, looking older and more haggard than ever. They didn't look at us, just whispered to their defense attorney, heads bowed. Anger surged in me, but Claire squeezed my hand and whispered, "Stay calm, Matt. We're already halfway to winning." The judge, a middle-aged man with an authoritative voice, banged his gavel to open the trial. The prosecutor, Elena Ramirez, a sharp woman with tightly pinned hair, began her presentation. She stood, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. "Your Honor, today we witness a case that is not just a crime, but the deepest betrayal of parents against their children." She paused, scanning the room, then continued. "The defendants, Richard Good and Linda Good, meticulously planned to abandon their son and daughter, Matthew and Clare Good, in the Alaskan wilderness, hoping nature would kill them. This was no accident, no misunderstanding. This was premeditated attempted murder." Ramirez presented the first piece of evidence, the audio from Ranger Rachel's recorder. The speakers blared, my father's voice clear and cold. $3.5 million. Finalize their death records. Keep it quiet. The courtroom buzzed, whispers rippling, and I saw my mother bow her head lower, her face pale. The prosecutor explained, "This is the defendant's bribe offer to Ranger Rachel after she delivered false news of the victims' deaths. They showed no grief, no regret, only a desire to cover up their crime." Next came our testimonies. I was called to the stand first. My heart pounded, hands gripping the wooden railing. The lawyer asked me to recount everything, the sudden invitation, the trip to Alaska, finding the note. I spoke in detail, trying to keep my voice steady, but it trembled when I described being lost in the forest. "We thought it was a chance to mend our family," I said, staring at my parents. "But they wanted us dead. They left a note hoping we'd be torn apart by bears." The courtroom was deathly silent, save for someone sniffling in the back. Claire went next, her voice soft but resolute. She described using her instincts to avoid danger, bandaging my wound, and the terror of realizing the truth. "They weren't parents," she said, tears streaming down. "They were killers." I was proud of Claire, but seeing her cry on the stand tore at my heart. Ranger Rachel testified next. She recounted the fake death plan, how she recorded the conversation, and our parents' satisfied reaction to our deaths. They didn't cry, she said firmly. They just wanted to finalize the paperwork and leave. She presented the note, physical evidence, and photos of the desolate campsite. The prosecutor closed her case, emphasizing, "This is attempted murder in the first degree coupled with bribery of a public official." The defendants didn't just want their children dead. They tried to buy the justice system to escape accountability. Then it was the defense's turn. My parents' lawyer, a lanky man with glasses, stood with feigned confidence. He called my father to the stand. His voice quivered as he made excuses. "We just wanted to challenge them. They're grown, independent since they were young. We thought the trip would make them stronger. The note was a joke." My mother followed, sobbing. "We love our children. This was a misunderstanding. We didn't want them to die, just to learn to survive." They put on a good act, but I saw their eyes. Not remorseful, but calculating. The prosecutor countered sharply. "A challenge? By abandoning them in the most dangerous wilderness without supplies and leaving a note wishing for their death? By offering a bribe to cover up their deaths?" Ramirez presented more evidence, our parents' financial records, showing they were in debt and likely wanted to seize the inheritance meant for us. The judge shook his head, dismissing the defense's claims. "The defendant's testimony is unconvincing," he said sternly. "This was no challenge. It was an inhumane act meant to eliminate their children for profit." The argument stretched for hours. The prosecutor painted a picture of a family destroyed by greed, emphasizing that without the fake death plan, our parents would have gotten away with it. The defense tried to downplay it, citing life pressures and family misunderstandings, but the judge remained unmoved. He paused, looked around the room and declared, "This court finds the defendants, Richard and Linda Good, guilty of attempted murder in the first degree for abandoning their children in the Alaskan wilderness with intent to kill. Additionally, they are guilty of bribery of a public official." The sentence is 15 years in prison for each defendant, with no early parole and the loss of all social and reputational privileges. The courtroom erupted. My father bowed his head. My mother sobbed louder, but I knew they were the tears of defeat. We stood, Claire hugging me tightly, and for the first time in 2 months I felt true relief. We had won. Not just survived, but claimed justice. But watching our parents led away, handcuffs clinking, I felt no joy. Only a deep sadness for the family I'd once dreamed of, long dead. After the trial, we left the courthouse under a light drizzle. Claire leaned her head on my shoulder, whispering, "We're free now, Matt." I nodded, but my heart remained heavy. 15 years in prison. Enough for them to reflect on what they'd done, but not enough to erase the scars they'd left us. We went home, cooked a simple dinner, and talked about the future, one without their shadow. I thought of our grandparents, the kind people I barely remembered, and wondered if they'd be proud of us. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal. I went back to managing the garage, fixing broken cars, finding joy in making them run again. Claire advanced at the hospital, caring for patients with even greater compassion. We didn't talk much about the trial, but sometimes Claire asked, "Do you think they regret it?" I shook my head. Probably not. But we don't need them anymore. A month after the trial, Claire and I decided to visit our parents in prison one last time. It wasn't my idea. Claire wanted closure, to look them in the eyes and say goodbye. I reluctantly agreed, knowing that if we didn't, their shadow would haunt us forever. We drove to the state prison, a grim gray building with high walls and barbed wire. The air was cold, echoing the Alaskan chill still lingering in my memory. We sat in the visitation room, separated by thick glass with 2 old phones connecting us. My father appeared first, looking aged, his hair white and face gaunt. My mother followed, her eyes puffy, but I knew it wasn't from remorse. It was from losing her freedom. They picked up the phones, my father's voice crackling through. "Matthew, Claire, you came to see us?" His tone was weak, as if playing the victim. Claire gripped my hand under the table, her voice calm but firm. "We came to say goodbye for good." I looked straight into their eyes, feeling like a frozen river was flowing through me. "You tried to kill us. Not an accident, not a test, it was intentional. We won't forgive you, we're officially cutting all ties. From now on, you're not our parents. We'll live independently, truly like we've done since we were kids, but now without your burden." Claire nodded, adding, "We don't need you. Not ever again." My father bowed his head, his voice trembling. "Please forgive us, kids, we're family. We made mistakes, but give us a chance." My mother sobbed, tears streaming. "Claire, my precious girl, I love you. Please reconsider." But it was a hollow plea, like the times they demanded gratitude without giving anything. I shook my head, my voice cold. "No. You lost that chance long ago. Goodbye." We put down the phones, stood and left without looking back. As we stepped outside, Claire exhaled like shedding a weight. "It's done, Matt," she said, and I hugged her tightly, feeling truly free for the first time. 2 years passed quickly. Our lives stabilized. I expanded the garage, hired more mechanics, and Claire became a head nurse, helping hundreds of patients with the compassion I'd always admired. We stopped mentioning our parents as if they were a closed chapter. Then one day I got a call from a lawyer, James Harlan, who introduced himself as the executor of our grandparents' estate. He asked us to meet at his office, his voice warm but serious. "There's something important about your grandparents' inheritance." When Claire and I arrived, Mr. Harlan greeted us with a kind smile and handed us a thick envelope. "You're now eligible to receive the trust fund from your grandparents, $7 million as stipulated in their will." Claire and I sat stunned, barely believing our ears. We'd known vaguely about the inheritance, but never imagined it was this substantial. The lawyer handed us an old letter, our grandparents' final testament, and some faded photos. In the pictures, they held us as babies, their faces beaming with warmth. I read the letter, my voice trembling. They wrote that they left the estate to us because they knew their son and daughter-in-law, our parents, couldn't be trusted. They saw their selfishness early on and wanted to protect us, to give us a future free from dependence. They loved us, even if they weren't with us long. Claire burst into tears, her fingers tracing the photos. "I don't remember much about them, Matt, but they saved us." I teared up too, for the first time in years. We silently thanked our grandparents, though our memories of them were just faint images. Her smile, his strong hand. They were the kind people the community once revered, and now their legacy lit our path. With the money, we built new lives. We established a scholarship fund in their name, the Henry and Margaret Good Fund, for abandoned children or those from toxic families, helping them study and stand on their own. Claire opened a community healthcare center, and I started a free auto repair shop for struggling families. We didn't splurge. Everything went toward helping others, as our grandparents had. Life became more meaningful, and we found joy in giving, not dwelling on the past. One summer day, we returned to Alaska, climbing a mountain where the wind was sharp and the views vast. Claire stood beside me, her hair whipping in the breeze, her eyes shining as she gazed at the pine forests and snow-capped peaks. "Look at that," she said, pointing to the horizon. I nodded, feeling we'd been tested, not just by bears, wolves, or freezing cold, but by our parents' toxicity. Yet we'd survived, stronger, freer. We hugged, laughing amid the boundless wilderness, knowing the future was ours, bright, unshadowed. And there, on that mountaintop, I whispered, "We won, Claire. We really won."